welcome. It is 7:30 in the evening in India and we are back again with our spotlight on G20. Did you know that the United Nations has estimated in 2018 that a staggering 3.6 trillion US dollars are lost every year in the form of bribes and stolen money to corruption? More recent estimates of the UNDP show that of the approximately 13 trillion US dollars that governments around the world spend on public spending, up to 25% is lost to corruption. The government of India has adopted a zero-tolerance approach towards corruption and is coming down hard, particularly on corruption in big places. On India at G20 today, we ask, can India, as G20 president, give a sharper edge to global anti-corruption efforts, combat the nexus between corruption, money laundering and terror financing, and also make it easier for countries to get back fugitive economic offenders so that they can face the rigors of law in the country where they committed financial crimes. I'm Munna Bhattacharya. Let's get started with the top stories. Meetings of engagement groups as part of India's G20 presidency to begin from January 2023. Think 20, Business 20, Startup 20 and Science 20 to be in focus in the month of January. And India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant pens his thoughts on data for development, terms data as today's most valuable resource and essential for nuanced and effective policy making. Says, as G20 president, India will call for modernization of data systems and advance principles of transparency to better use data for development. Almost a month back, a session on Financial Action Task Force and India's priorities in G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group in New Delhi laid the ground for India's anti-corruption pitch as G20 president. Here's how corruption is being combated by the government of India, the resolve of the government to break the nexus between corruption and terror financing, and the deliverables on which India is currently focusing on as G20 chair on the anti-corruption plank within the G20 framework.
In November 2022, New Delhi hosted a session on Financial Action Task Force and India's priorities in G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. The session was organized by the Department of Revenue on the eve of the third No Money for Terror Ministerial Conference on Counter-Terrorism Financing. At that session, it was underscored that the effort during India's presidency will be to promote better international cooperation and sharing of information through formal and informal means and to have robust systems for recovery of stolen assets cutting across borders. That was followed by the third No Money for Terror Ministerial Conference on Counter-Terrorism Financing. At the conference, Prime Minister Narendra Modi underlined organized crime as another source of terror funding and emphasized the deep links between criminal gangs and terrorist outfits.
One of the sources of terror funding is organized crime. Organized crime should not be seen in isolation. These gangs often have deep links with terrorist outfits. The money made in gun running, drugs, and smuggling is pumped into terrorism. These groups help with logistics and communication too. Action against organized crime is extremely important in the fight against terror. At times, even activities like money laundering and financial crimes have been known to help terror fundings. Fighting it needs global collaboration.
PM Modi also put the spotlight on the changing dynamics of terrorism in light of advancing technology and called out the use of new kinds of technologies for terror financing and recruitment.
The dynamics of terrorism are changing. Rapidly advancing technology is both a challenge and a solution. New kinds of technology are being used for terror financing and recruitment. Challenges from the darknet, private currencies, and more are emerging. There is a need for a uniform understanding for new finance technologies. It is also important to involve the private sector in these efforts. From a uniform understanding, a unified system of checks and balances and regulations can emerge.
The Government of India has been cracking down on corruption within the country and also entering into international agreements to curb the flow of illicit money overseas. Its domestic actions include the 2018 amendment to the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988 to criminalize the act of giving bribes, and the enactment of the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act 2018 to empower authorities for non-conviction based attachments and confiscation of proceeds of crime, properties and assets of such offenders. Besides that, the Government of India has entered into double taxation avoidance agreement with Mauritius, Cyprus and Singapore, sealed an agreement with Switzerland on real-time information sharing, signed FATCA with the USA, and joined the Multilateral Competent Authority Agreement to curb black money. As G20 President, India is now set to take the global anti-corruption agenda forward and build on the anti-corruption work undertaken by previous G20 chairs, such as Japan's work on promoting integrity in infrastructure development and strengthening whistleblower protection, Saudi Arabia's work on criminalizing foreign bribery, Italy's work on imposing measurement of corruption, tackling corruption and organized crime, promoting integrity in sports, and preventing and combating corruption in emergency situations, and Indonesia's work on combating money laundering, terrorism financing and proliferation financing, and seizing criminal proceeds and returning funds to victims and states. The baton has been passed to India to sharpen global anti-corruption efforts. Bureau Report, DD India.
And for perspective, we are being joined by Y.C. Modi. He is a former Director General of NIA, National Investigation Agency, and Professor Nilanjan Banik. He is an economist. I welcome you both to this special broadcast India at G20. For a big picture, I'll come to you, Professor Nilanjan, first. What is the kind of progress to your mind that G20 as a grouping has made over the years in the fight against corruption with its association with organizations like the OECD and the FATF, and how can India further sharpen these anti-corruption efforts?
So there are two aspects to this. One is tax evasion, the other is tax competition. Now, when we are talking about the G20 group of countries, way back from the Brisbane days, at that point of time, even then, our PM Modi was very conscious and was very pertinent that this black money or the tax evasion thing has to be brought into the table. Now, if you look at what is being happening, now there are two aspects, as I mentioned. When we are talking about the tax evasion part, now because many of the countries, they don't have prudent tax law within themselves, and why people, or for that matter, corporate, they don't pay tax. Either the administration is not competent enough to collect the tax, or maybe the system is so cumbersome that as an individual, I shy away from paying the tax. Or it can so happen if I have an information that the system is corrupt, I can bribe my way through. Then also I don't pay the tax. Now, in all these three accounts, over a period of time, what has been happening in the context of India, you have seen that even after the introduction of GST and also with the personal income tax, there have been a mass improvement in tax collection. Now, for instance, in case of GST, the tax collection went up from 7.2 trillion rupees to almost 14.2 trillion rupees within the span of 5 years. Now, that's a remarkable improvement. Now, why I'm saying that the tax cumbersome thing is important, because there are many underdeveloped countries, they don't have even the know-how as to how to put into place a efficient tax system. Now, when that happens, even if you are trying to negotiate with other countries, if I don't have the proper tax system in place, they don't have the know-how as to how to tax. I will give you one example. These days we are talking about digital tax.
Right.
Now, if you are talking about, let's say, taxing Google or Facebook of the world, the first thing you should try to understand that whether it makes sense to tax this tech companies because they are using your data for doing various businesses, right? Now,
Right.
the obvious question to ask is what would be the rate of tax? Now, for instance, countries like Switzerland or Ireland, where the tax rates are low, it is very pertinent on part of these tech companies to shift their profit, from the high tax economy to the low tax economy. And therefore, it is very much important that among the countries, they come out with a uniform tax code, which will be beneficial so that you don't see even the big corporates, they are siphoning off money from your economy. And this is very important at this point of time because most of the countries around the world, they are facing recession. And when
Right.
you have a recession, the one most important component of growth, or for that matter, indulging any social activity, has to come from tax. And
Right.
therefore, I think what India is doing is the step in the right direction in the sense that it is giving importance as to how to make a coordinated effort, A, to collect tax, B, to stop people not to pay tax or evade tax.
Right. Just taking a clarification from you, are you saying that there should be uniform taxation laws across countries in the G20 so that these issues that you pointed out can be sorted?
Yeah, so this again, as I was mentioning, that for the corporate tax, which is a known business, there should be an instance of uniform tax. But for some emerging type of technology, for instance, digital technology, which are new things which are coming to the table, which
Right.
are evolving, even the policymakers have no clue as to how to tax them. That's the reason I gave you the example of
Big
the
tech.
data or taxation on the basis of the data that you are using.
Okay.
So for that matter, it is going to take some time, but as the technology is evolving, as we are moving more to the digital, I think time has come for all the group of countries to come and speak together and try to sort this issue.
Right. Mr. Modi, coming to you now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address at the No Money for Terror conference, spoke about the nexus between crime and financing of terrorism. You would have seen that nexus from very close quarters. What is the scale of that nexus, and how can India's chairship of G20 sharpen these efforts to break that nexus between crime and financing of terrorism?
First of all, we'll have to see the strength of G20. G20 is though an informal group of different top economies, but as a body, though it being informal, it can certainly bring the protocols to control terror financing. Our experience has shown that no terrorist activity can take place without money. You need money for committing any terror activity. As far as connection of organized crime with terrorist activities is concerned, we in NIA have experience in Kashmir that we have found that drug trafficking, terrorists are getting money from drug trafficking, arms smuggling. In fact, the money from fake currency. We have found cases where money has gone to terrorists through fake currency. In fact, state and non-state actors both have been involved in pumping fake currency in India, which Indian agencies have been fighting very effectively. NIA as an agency has done many cases, but it's a cat and mouse game. These bodies, these non-state and state actors, they try to pump money using different methods. Like when they find that to pump money in India directly is difficult, we have found cases where fake Indian currency has moved from Pakistan to some Gulf country, from Gulf country to Nepal. And we know that we have open borders with Nepal. Ultimately, that money would come to India. And in Nepal, you know that Indian currency can be used very freely. So there is no doubt that there has been very, very close links of organized crime with the terrorism. So, as Prime Minister had very emphatically pointed out, that we'll have to break this nexus, and we feel that G20 can have a very important role in this matter. And as India has been on the forefront of fighting terrorism and India's leadership, we certainly feel that will certainly help in this matter.
Right, Mr. Modi, I want to build on that and ask you that there is international cooperation through an intergovernmental body like Interpol. Besides that, the FATF also keeps a tab on terror financing. It does rank and list countries in the grey list, black list, etc. How can G20 further collaborate with these groups? Because if you look at the Bali Declaration, there is a mention of the FATF, OECD is mentioned in one declaration after the other, year after year. Yet we are looking at a very strong nexus that continues to date and is perhaps getting stronger with the advent of virtual currencies between organized crime as well as terror financing. So what is the kind of cooperation that you would like G20 to put forth in order to break this nexus to the extent it's possible?
No, it is well accepted that there is a need for clear-cut protocols, consensus on the laws. The problem is each country has its own laws. I understand that it is easier said than done, but in these type of conferences, we can adopt certain documents, certain model laws which can be adopted by all the countries, all the member countries to effectively deal with terror financing. Like last No Money for Terror conference, the third conference was held in New Delhi,
Right.
where India offered to submit discussion papers and seek comments of all the participating countries and organizations, which later can come up with model laws which can be adopted by all the countries, making the task of international bodies to enforce these terror efforts, to take them to the logical conclusion easier. If we have the laws on which there is broad consensus between the different countries, and we have the similar laws, so that action can be taken effectively.
Right. So both of you are saying that there is a need for similar laws. Professor Nilanjan is speaking in the context of taxation to avoid tax evasion, that is, and you are talking about breaking the nexus between organized crime and terror financing through uniformity of laws. But as a via media, Dr. Nilanjan, can there be recognition of domestic laws, in a situation wherein, say, a fugitive is involved? For instance, India is trying hard to get hold of Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, but there are various legal processes in the country in which they have taken safe haven so far that are being followed. So a lot of time is being wasted as a result of that, and India is waiting to prosecute them, to bring them to justice. Do you think that if there is recognition of domestic laws under the G20 framework going forward, or if you can think of any other cooperation that can take place under the G20 framework to resolve that issue, what could that be?
So let's not try to miss the bigger picture.
Right.
Let me try to explain what I'm trying to say. You see that we are talking about two aspects of the tax treaty. The first is the legal aspect, which we can kind of negotiate with our trading partner. The other is the illegal aspect that you were talking about, that whether to bring other type of agencies like Interpol and all this agency to under the same umbrella. Now, when it comes to a person like Vijay Mallya or Choksi, or all this person, now if you look into the amount of money which has gone out because of this type of activities, that has clearly to do with the domestic law. But at this point of time, as India is negotiating with many countries, including EU, United Arab Emirates, Australia, New Zealand, one thing we should keep in mind that most of these countries, they are now bringing in extra trade issues. For instance, they are bringing in environment, they are bringing in labor, they are bringing in the gender, all these extra trade issues when we are negotiating with these countries. Why? Because the institution, as we are talking about, are already put in place in most of the developed countries. So they are trying to use those institutions, be it climate, be it environment, to restrict access for our export. Now, my point is, if we are trying to negotiate with these partners, including the partners in the G20 group, why can't we say that you should also have to recognize our tax treaty? For instance, if you are giving lower tax, you should bring it in tandem with the tax regime that we have in India, so that be it for the manufacturing good, be it for the services, so that at the time of trade, because it's more about give and take, right? So when they're putting emphasis on environment, when they're putting emphasis on climate, why can't we also try to help on this issue of tax coordination across national boundary? I think if we can do that, that is going to bring lots of money back to India. I was looking into the World Bank data. In terms of remittance, India, now there is a big increase in remittance which is coming to India. In addition to that, if we can somehow ensure that the corporate tax rate across countries are more or less same, we can also bring in lots of investment which are coming to India, because China, for all matter, is completely shut down. And at this point of time, if we have a coordination in international tax treaty, you will also find lots of corporate investment coming to India. The question is how fast and how soon we can actually enter into this nitty-gritty of the tax thing that we are talking about.
Right. Also, Professor Nilanjan, there are various treaties that India has entered into. For instance, there is a double taxation avoidance agreement that India entered into with Mauritius, Cyprus, with Singapore. Besides that, there is a real-time information exchange agreement that India has entered into with Switzerland. India is now a signatory of MCAA as well. We have signed FATCA with the United States. India showcases that as institutionalizing integrity, but what are the gaps that you see currently in those frameworks that we've entered into? How can they be further improved upon?
No, I think you have already mentioned about this, because the domestic tax law varies from one country to another country. And also, if you look into what has happened when the state was formed, the Supreme Court gave an order trying to figure out what amount of foreign or Indian money is being stashed into foreign economy. You will find that close to 0.7 trillion crore rupees are still outside India. Now, the most important thing for this to happen is tax sharing information, and you can actually get information on tax sharing only if you file a charge sheet against that particular organization or against that particular person. Now, most of the foreign banks, in particularly in Switzerland, they insist that once you file a charge sheet, that has to be shared with their government, and only then they will come out with the name, or they will come out with the source of income. I think from a government to government basis, what India can do is to fasten this process of exchanging of information and then to act on it. As I started off, when I started off by saying that one element of me being a tax compliant has to see that how easy for me is to file the tax, That, and the other issue is, of course, that how transparent or how honest is the particular government is in terms of tax collection and tax distribution.
Right.
Now, if you see the figure which I gave you, because we have actually designed our GST tax collection mechanism in such a nice way, the tax collection went up by almost 7 trillion Indian rupees within a matter of 5 years. And this kind of thing, as I was mentioning, can be used for other social activity. For instance, if I look into the total budgetary allocation for health, it comes to around 85,000 crores.
So it can boost national development and help achieve SDGs
ensure
too.
that we are actually getting more money, either through trade negotiation or by building a system where it is easier for us to collect tax. I think it will be beneficial.
Right. Very quick comment from you, Mr. Modi, on whether you think technology can be further leveraged even through the G20 platform to break the nexus between organized crime and terror financing.
Our experience has been that the terror funding is being done using both formal and informal methods. What has been happening is that in the formal methods, the money is coming to the terrorists in such a way that normal business activities and terrorist money coming for terrorist activities get intertwined. The problem is we'll have to separate that the money which is for legitimate purposes coming and the money which is coming for terrorism purposes. For that, perhaps artificial intelligence and machine learning, these techniques can be used because the transactions are huge. It becomes very, very difficult to find out. It is just like finding from the, big chunk, a very, very small item, because out of thousands or lakhs of items, there may be one or two items.
Point taken. So we need to use the technology in order to differentiate between legitimate money and illegitimate money. We'll leave it at that, Mr. Modi. Professor Nilanchan, thank you so much for sharing your views with us on this special broadcast. Let's move on now. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has shared a clipping of his article published in the National Daily, where he writes, data forms the bedrock on which today's knowledge pyramid rises towards awareness, understanding and finally wisdom, which is essential for nuanced and effective policy making. G20 India is an opportune time to set a new gold standard for data. The article is titled, India will set new data standards in G20 stint. The article highlights India's ambitious role in making data globally accessible. Kant writes in his article, as we enter India's decade, data must be accessible to all citizens. We must adopt a multi-sectoral approach to collecting, integrating and interpreting data, as this will strengthen service delivery by government at all levels. Further, Amitabh Kant asserts that when it comes to data governance, India offers a range of best practices which can be emulated and advanced by other nations. For any government, clear and nuanced visibility of data when it comes to outlays, outputs and outcomes is substantially important. In the context of the G20 presidency of India, Kant asserts India's G20 presidency is an opportune time to set a new gold standard for data, a gold standard which emphasizes nations to invest in self-evaluation of data governance architecture and calls for modernization of national data systems to incorporate citizens' voices and preferences regularly. And within the G20 framework, there are engagement groups which bring together civil societies, parliamentarians, think tanks, women, youth, labor, businesses and researchers of the G20 countries. G20 India's official Twitter handle has announced the schedule of meetings of engagement groups as part of India's G20 presidency. You can have a look at that. It states that the engagements of the engagement groups will begin from January 2023 and 4 engagement groups will be in focus in the month of January. They are Think 20, Business 20, Startup 20 and Science 20. And with that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. We'll see you again tomorrow with a fresh edition, same time on DD India. Stay tuned.
The changing world of news. Headlines that you wake up to. News that shapes your day. Stories that matter to you. The latest and most accurate updates. A fresh start to a new day. The Breakfast News, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. on DD India.